On my wedding night, while I was still wearing my white dress, my husband was inside another woman, calling it love. I didn't know it yet, but this was the moment my real life began. I loved him so completely that morning that doubt did not even know where to sit inside me. The chapel doors breathed open and light poured in like forgiveness. I remember thinking, this is what safety looks like. Linen suits. White roses. A string quartet playing something old and patient. I was 26 and certain that love, once chosen carefully, stayed. My name is Aurelian Knox. At least that's the name I was given, the one that could survive. I never knew my mother. Not her voice. Not her scent. Not the way she might have touched my hair. All I ever knew was that she was gone before memory could form, and that questions were dangerous things in the house where I was raised. Silas Calder, my uncle, taught me early that silence was not emptiness, it was armor. Silas stood in the front row that day, spine straight, eyes scanning the room the way men do when they've lived long enough to know joy never arrives alone. He wore no smile. He never did at important moments. And then there was Bennett Hale, my groom. Bennett was kindness refined. Not loud. Not theatrical. A man who believed in restraint the way others believed in God. His voice could calm rooms. His hands never shook. He made me feel chosen, not chased. When I met him I thought, this is what peace looks like in a man. That's why I didn't notice the first crack. Not until I was close enough to see his face. When I reached the altar I saw it, the faint dissonance like a note played just slightly off-key. His smile was there, practiced and perfect, but his eyes were somewhere else. Not wandering. Spent. There is a look people carry when they have already given away something sacred. I told myself it was nerves. Because what kind of woman, standing in white, surrounded by witnesses and promises, suspects betrayal before the vows? Bennett leaned in and whispered, "You're breathtaking." His breath trembled. Not with emotion, with aftermath. I didn't understand it then. I only felt a small, irrational chill move through me, like the first warning of a storm that hasn't earned its name yet. The ceremony moved forward. Words were spoken. Applause rose like approval from heaven itself. When he kissed me, his lips were warm but distant, polite, almost grateful. I told myself love grows. The reception was held in a restored estate overlooking the river. Old money architecture. New money polish. Everything gleamed. Bennett disappeared for a moment. Only a moment. He said he needed air. I watched him walk away, shoulders tight, jaw locked, like a man who had just finished a difficult negotiation. I did not follow him. Because I trusted him. Because love, when it is young, believes privacy is respect. What I did not know, what I could not have known, was that earlier that same day in a quiet apartment across town, Bennett had knelt before another woman. Her name was Corinne Vale. She was not loud. She was not soft. She was history. He loved her the way men love what they believe they were denied. With resentment disguised as devotion. With hunger sharpened by rules. He told her the truth that morning. The truth he never told me. "My father made me do this," he said. "Silas and him, they've been planning this for years. It's a contract wearing a dress." Corinne did not cry. She listened. Then she did something that would follow me for years. She removed her underwear slowly, deliberately, folded them with care, and pressed them into his hand like an offering. He doesn't need to see her to feel her presence. The faint trace of her scent lingers, soft and teasing on the fabric she left behind. It calls to him in a whisper only he can hear, slow and deliberate. He inhales, letting it sink deep, letting the memory of her warmth flood him. It's not just desire. It's devotion, a magnetic pull that keeps him tethered to her, even when she's gone. Every fold, every subtle trace, tells him her story, her closeness, her private world. A world he cherishes, craves and guards. Because he knows, no matter where she is, this reminder, this intimate, invisible thread, binds them together endlessly, irresistibly. "For memory," she said. "So you don't forget who you belong to." In that quiet moment, alone with her essence, he smiles. He called it a gift. The most precious one he had ever received. That night, after the music softened and the guests thinned, I noticed something else. Bennett took longer than usual to change out of his suit. He locked the door. When he emerged, he avoided my eyes. Lifted his arms slowly, inhaled deeply, like a man summoning strength from somewhere dark and familiar. I smiled at him. I told him I was happy. Because love, when it is honest, assumes honesty in return. I did not know that somewhere, folded carefully and hidden, was proof that my marriage had begun long before me, and without me. I did not know that this wedding was not a beginning. It was a cover. And the most dangerous lies are not the ones we're told, but the ones we help tell ourselves. I never knew her. Not her voice, not her hands, not the warmth that is supposed to cradle a newborn. My first memory was silence, the kind that hangs in the air when someone has made a choice too dangerous to explain. They called her Celine Veyron, my mother. A woman whose life had been borrowed, whose freedom had been rented out for secrets. She was the hidden one, the concubine of a man whose name could open doors and close lives. He was Alaric Veyron, a titan among men, a man whose power cast shadows longer than any skyscraper. His wife, Evelyn Veyron, ruled their empire with cold eyes and sharper instincts. Anyone who crossed that line vanished, or worse, survived with scars that no money could erase. Celine had known she was nothing but a placeholder. A mistake waiting for the right punishment. She had lived recklessly, indulging in freedom she could barely afford, and one night her recklessness became permanent. She had destroyed her womb, or at least the doctor told her so. When the pregnancy came, it wasn't part of her plan. She didn't plan to be a mother. She hadn't even wanted to exist in that role. Yet there I was, heartbeat fluttering like a tiny rebellion inside her. The doctor's office smelled of antiseptic and leather-bound regret. He looked at her with that clinical pity that only doctors have for the damned. "You can't carry another," he said softly. "Your body, after the last procedure, the trauma, you may not survive. You shouldn't risk it." Celine's hands trembled slightly. She pressed them against her belly as if she were weighing the life inside against the life outside. "I'll take it," she whispered. He blinked. "You know the consequences." "I know," she said. And she did. Choosing me was choosing danger. Choosing me was walking past the edge of a cliff without looking down. Choosing me was writing a contract with death and signing it in her own blood. When the world found out, or when it inevitably would, she would be hunted. Evelyn's wrath was legendary. Alaric's protection was conditional. Even those loyal to her could not be counted on. So she erased herself. Not literally. Not in the way a body disappears. But in every other way that mattered. She became invisible. She disappeared from memory. She vanished from family history. She made sure no photograph carried her smile. No friend could remember her voice. She trusted one man, my uncle Silas Calder, to raise me, to protect me, to keep me alive in a world that would have happily buried both of us. When Silas accepted me that day, the deal was simple. I would be safe. She would be gone. And in exchange, my existence became a secret weapon, a living proof of her greatest sin. It was a sin that saved me. And later I would realize the cruel irony. A mother's greatest sin had given me the chance to survive, to fight, to love, to learn how to be powerful in a world that demanded it, and to forgive her even without ever seeing her face. But in that moment, my birth, she had only one thought. This child will live. Even if I cannot. And that, I would learn, was the first lesson in a life full of impossible choices. I grew up on streets that didn't forgive mistakes. Broken sidewalks, chipped paint on stoops, and the constant hum of sirens were my lullabies. This was Southside Newark, where dreams were measured in survival, not diplomas, and respect cost more than money. My uncle Silas Calder was the reason I lived. He was strange. People whispered it like a warning. He walked like someone who belonged to two worlds. One above the law, one beneath it. Kids feared him. Men respected him. Women didn't cross him. I trusted him because he had taken me in when the world wanted me erased. "Never react first," he told me the first day I stayed with him. He was standing on the cracked concrete of his stoop, arms crossed, eyes scanning the street like a hawk. "Watch. Learn. React only when the moment demands it. You act first, you die first." He taught me silence the way other children learned to speak. Words were dangerous. Curiosity dangerous. Even emotions were a liability unless sharpened into strategy. I remember the first time he let me watch him in action. A man had crossed him, someone small but loud. I expected violence. But Silas didn't move at first. He watched. The man barked threats, thinking the stoop belonged to him. Silas inhaled, lifted a hand slowly, and in that pause, the man realized he had already lost. No words, no punches, just watching. That was power. I memorized every corner of that block. The graffiti that signaled a gang's boundary, the fire hydrant that rattled when police cars rolled by, the abandoned lot where deals were made and lives changed. America smelled like asphalt and ambition here. It was gritty, raw, unfair, but honest in its way. Silas didn't let me play with dolls. He handed me a notebook instead and told me to record everything. Names, faces, habits. Life is observation, he said. People will give themselves away if you pay attention. I learned to move quietly through the ghetto streets, blending in but seeing everything. I learned when to smile and when to vanish. I learned that the world outside our walls had no patience for weakness. And I learned the most important lesson of all. Survival is an art. Even now, years later, I remember the sound of the cracked pavement under my sneakers, the smell of rain on asphalt, and the way Silas's eyes could freeze time in a glance. America didn't raise me, he did. And in that silence I became someone who could endure anything. I didn't know who I really was, not fully. My mother's blood, my father's legacy, my uncle's lessons, they all wove into me in ways I could not name. But I did know this. In a world that would try to overwrite me, I had learned to survive. And survival, I realized, is the first step to power. His name was Bennett Hale, and the first time I truly saw him, I felt like I had been waiting for a calm I didn't even know I needed. He was polished, deliberate in every gesture, as if the world's chaos had no claim on him. His suits fit like armor, but not the kind that intimidated. Armor that protected, that promised quiet steadiness. His hands were long, warm, and steady. His voice was soft, almost hypnotic. We didn't fall in love the way novels described it. There were no fireworks, no sudden leaps into each other's arms. Our courtship was measured, polite, filled with the kind of careful distance that comes from lives already scarred by choices we didn't make. I remember the first dinner at his apartment. The faint scent of cedar from the shelves, the soft golden light spilling over leather chairs, the sound of his piano from a recording in the corner. He poured wine with precision, offered food I liked without asking me, and listened in a way that made the room feel quieter, safer. I mistook that calm for love. "I want this to be easy for you," he said one evening as we sat on the balcony overlooking the city. "I know I'm expected to marry you, but I want you to feel this is your choice too." I nodded, swallowing the doubt that crept into the corners of my heart. Because at that age I was young and hopeful. I wanted the fairy tale, even if the world had taught me there weren't any. He was kind, polished, careful. He remembered the smallest things I said, smiled at the right moments, held doors, poured tea, listened. I began to rely on his presence like air. Subtle, essential, comforting. And yet, I could feel the weight of something unsaid between us. A quiet tension in the way his eyes sometimes lingered too long, in the way he would straighten his tie, as if hiding a thought too dangerous to speak. But I ignored it. I wanted to trust him fully. I wanted to believe that calm was love. Our first slow dance in the living room felt like a soft promise. His arms were steady around me, his forehead resting lightly against mine. I closed my eyes and told myself, this is what safety feels like. I could feel my heart starting to settle. I could feel hope creeping in. Little did I know that calm, no matter how comforting, can sometimes be the perfect mask for a lie. But that night, with the city lights painting his face in gold and amber, I believed him. I trusted him. I gave myself to the idea that he was mine and I was his, fully. And for the first time in my life I let my guard slip. I never saw her. But I felt her everywhere. She lived in the pauses between his words, in the way his body moved when he thought I wasn't watching. She existed in the locked doors, the silences that arrived too suddenly, the breath he took before answering simple questions. That morning, the morning of our wedding, I noticed the shift. Bennett stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, his back turned to me. He adjusted his cufflinks twice, then a third time as if his hands didn't trust themselves. His jaw was tight. His shoulders held a tension I had never seen before, like a man coming back from somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. "You okay?" I asked softly, smiling, barefoot on cold marble. He inhaled deeply before answering. Not a nervous breath. A satisfied one. Like someone grounding themselves after indulgence. "Yeah," he said. "Just a lot today." I nodded. Of course it was a lot. Weddings are heavy with meaning. I told my body to relax, told my instincts to stop whispering nonsense. But instincts don't speak loudly. They wait. He locked the bathroom door when he showered. That was new. Steam curled out from under the frame, thick and intimate, as if it carried secrets with it. When he emerged, his skin was flushed, his eyes darker than usual. Alive in a way that made my chest tighten for reasons I couldn't name. He wouldn't meet my gaze. Later, much later, I would learn the truth of those hours. That before putting on the suit meant for me, he had gone to her. Her name was Corinne Vale. They weren't married. They were unfinished. Unresolved. The kind of connection that doesn't end cleanly because it was never built on rules to begin with. They didn't plan a future that morning. They didn't need to. What they shared lived in the body, not in promises. I imagined the room was quiet. I imagined the urgency, the familiarity. I imagined the way people touch when they know they are about to lose something. And when it was over, when the moment had been stolen and sealed, Corinne did something deliberate. She pulled off her pants slowly, not in haste, not in need. She folded them with care like something sacred. Then she handed them to him. Over to him. He inhaled it deeply. Eyes closed, grounding himself in the scent of her. As if memorizing it. As if carrying her into the rest of the day. He loves the quiet perfume. Not the kind sold in bottles, but the kind woven from her warmth, her presence, her being. The faint trace that lingers in the fabric when she's gone, like a whispered promise that says, I was here, and I'll return. To him that scent is comfort and temptation all at once. It reminds him of shared mornings, of laughter caught between breaths, of the safety of loving one woman deeply. It steadies him. It stirs him. It belongs to no one else. He inhales it not out of desire alone, but devotion. Because loving her means loving every quiet echo she leaves behind. A trophy. She smiled. Don't forget, she said. You were mine first. He didn't argue. Back then all I knew was that something was wrong. At the venue, as guests laughed and glasses clinked, Bennett moved like a man split in two. He smiled on cue. He touched my hand when required. But his energy kept slipping away from me, drifting somewhere I couldn't follow. When I leaned in to whisper something sweet, he flinched just slightly. Like my closeness interrupted a memory he hadn't finished replaying. I told myself I was imagining things. Because love, especially young love, hates the idea of betrayal. It will bend reality to protect itself. I stood in white. I smiled for cameras. I promised forever to a man who had already given a part of himself away that morning. And my body knew. It knew in the way my stomach tightened. In the way my chest felt hollow even as I smiled. In the way my reflection looked beautiful but strangely alone. So I denied it. Because the truth, if I had let it in, would have shattered everything before it even began. So I chose belief over instinct. I chose calm over clarity. I chose him. And somewhere, unseen but present, was the woman he couldn't leave. Already inside my marriage, already shaping its end, long before I ever understood how love can lie without speaking a word. My son arrived on a quiet morning, the kind that makes you believe the world is finally gentle. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and warm linen. Light filtered through half-drawn blinds, soft and forgiving. When I heard his first cry, something ancient broke open inside me, something fierce and holy. I held him against my chest and felt for the first time that I had made something pure in a life that had always felt provisional. We named him Elliot. Bennett stood beside the bed, immaculate even in exhaustion. He kissed my forehead, smiled for the nurses, held our son with careful hands, like a man holding a future he wasn't sure how to enter. You did beautifully, he said. I believed him. For a while motherhood filled every hollow space. Nights blurred into mornings. My body ached in places I didn't know existed. I learned the language of cries, the rhythm of breath against my collarbone, the miracle of a tiny hand closing around my finger like a promise. I thought this would bring us closer. Instead it quietly removed him. At first the distance was polite. He worked later. Answered emails at the dinner table. Kissed my cheek instead of my lips. When I leaned into him at night he shifted slightly, just enough to create space without explanation. I'm tired, he said. I know, I answered. I always answered kindly. Weeks passed. Then months. My body healed but his touch never returned. He stopped looking at me the way he once did, like I was something chosen. Now he looked past me, through me, as if I were a room he passed through on the way to somewhere else. I started to notice myself in mirrors again. The softness my body carried now. The way my skin felt unfamiliar. I wondered when I had become someone easy to overlook. Was it motherhood? Was it me? I didn't ask him. I was afraid of the answer, and more afraid of the silence that might follow. At night, Elliot slept between us like a border neither of us crossed. Bennett lay on his back, hands folded neatly over his chest, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes I turned toward him just to feel less alone, but he never noticed. I began to shrink. I folded myself smaller emotionally, the way women do when love begins to feel conditional. I stopped asking for affection. Stopped initiating conversation that might reveal how lonely I was becoming. I told myself this was normal. That marriages change. That desire fades. That good women endure. But invisibility is not endurance. It's erosion. One evening I stood in the doorway watching him play with our son. He smiled then, wide, genuine, alive. It cut deeper than anger ever could. Because it told me the truth I was trying not to see. He still knew how to love. He just wasn't loving me. I carried that realization quietly like a private grief. I loved my son with everything in me. I would have bled for him without hesitation. But somewhere in the sacred act of becoming a mother, I had begun to disappear as a woman. And the cruelest part was this. No one noticed. Not the world. Not my husband. And for a long time not even me. Until one night, standing alone in the bathroom staring at my own reflection, I whispered the question that frightened me most. When did I stop being enough? The mirror didn't answer. But my silence did. It didn't begin with touch. That's what people get wrong. It began with being seen. By the time I noticed it, I had already learned how to live without expectation. I woke, fed my son, folded laundry, answered polite questions from a man who shared my bed but not my inner life. Bennett was not cruel. That made it harder. Cruelty gives you something to fight. Politeness just erases you slowly. I stopped asking why he no longer reached for me. I told myself love evolved. I told myself good women adjusted. But my body didn't adjust. It waited. The first time I gave attention elsewhere, it was almost accidental. A conversation that lingered a second longer than necessary. A look that held instead of sliding away. His name was Luca Moretti and he didn't smile often. When he did, it felt deliberate, earned. We met through a mutual acquaintance, nothing romantic, nothing inappropriate. I told myself that over and over. He listened when I spoke. Didn't interrupt. Didn't rush to fix me. He looked at me like I was a complete thought, not an obligation. That alone felt dangerous. I justified it as harmless. As healing. As conversation between adults who knew how to carry themselves. I told myself I deserved to feel alive again, if only in small, controlled ways. I didn't touch him. Not yet. But something inside me shifted. I noticed it in the calm that replaced my anxiety. In the way I no longer waited for Bennett's attention like a starving thing. I stopped dressing for his gaze. Stopped timing my affection to his availability. I began to exist for myself again. And with that, something startling happened. I grew quiet but not small. Bennett noticed the change before I did. He asked fewer questions than more. He lingered in doorways, watched me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I was kinder to him, but distant. Present but unreachable. Emotional detachment doesn't announce itself. It arrives like relief. I no longer felt rejected when he turned away. I no longer counted days between touches. I no longer questioned my worth in the dark. I had stopped needing him to confirm my existence. And in that freedom I felt stronger. I laughed more easily. I breathed deeper. I slept without rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I became softer with my son, sharper with the world, and gentler with myself. For the first time since my wedding day, I felt choice return to my body. That scared me. Because women like me were taught that loyalty meant endurance, that desire was dangerous, that peace came from patience. But no one warned us what happens when patience becomes self-erasure. I didn't plan to leave my marriage. I didn't plan to cross a line. I planned to survive. And sometimes survival begins the moment you allow yourself to feel again. Not because you want to destroy what you have, but because you are tired of disappearing inside it. I didn't know yet where this path would lead. I only knew this. I was calm. I was stronger. I was finally free enough to notice when something inside me had already let go. And once a woman lets go emotionally, the rest is only a matter of time. He didn't introduce himself like a threat. That's what made him one. Luca Moretti moved through rooms the way men do when they've survived things they don't speak about. Disciplined. Self-made in the most literal sense. No inheritance, no protection, just instinct sharpened into control. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't boast. Power hummed under his skin like a current. The first thing he ever told me was the truth. "Nothing about me is safe," he said, looking directly at me. "If you stay with open eyes." I believed him. Because men who lie about danger smile when they say it. Our lifestyles matched in a way that startled me. He understood silence. Timing. Consequences. He didn't ask questions he didn't need answered. He didn't demand explanations. He watched just like my uncle had taught me to do. When we spoke, it wasn't flirtation. It was recognition. He stood close without touching me, and my body responded anyway. There was no begging in it. No reaching. Just awareness. The kind that starts in your chest and spreads slowly, deliberately, until you realize you've been holding your breath. He never rushed me. That alone unraveled something inside me. The first time he brushed his fingers against my wrist, it wasn't accidental. It wasn't clumsy. It was intentional, brief, and devastating. A simple touch that carried weight, permission without demand. I forgot to check my phone. Forgot the time. Forgot the careful life I had been shrinking myself to fit into. With Luca, desire wasn't loud. It was controlled. He made me feel chosen without needing to ask. Wanted without being claimed. Seen without being consumed. When we finally crossed the line, it wasn't reckless. It was inevitable. He kissed me like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Slow, grounding, unapologetic. His presence was overwhelming, not because he took, but because he waited, because he paid attention, because he made space for me to arrive fully in my own body. I didn't have to perform. I didn't have to ask. I didn't have to explain what I needed. He read me. And in that reading, something woke up. Something my husband had never touched, never reached, never even noticed. A part of me that had been starving quietly while pretending it wasn't hungry. After I lay there stunned by how calm I felt. No guilt. No panic. Just clarity. I realized I didn't want to go home. Not because of Luca, but because of who I became when I was with him. Present. Desired. Awake. Home had become a place where I waited. The Luca I existed. And that was the most dangerous truth of all. Because once a woman remembers what it feels like to be alive without begging, she never forgets it. Home became quiet in a way that should have felt like peace. There were no arguments. No slammed doors. No raised voices to warn me something was wrong. The house functioned perfectly. Clean counters, folded laundry, a sleeping child breathing softly down the hall. But it was empty. Not abandoned. Vacant. I moved through the rooms like a guest who knew where everything was but no longer felt invited. I cooked dinner without tasting it. I smiled without meaning it. I kissed my husband on the cheek the way people do when affection has become etiquette. And the strangest part was this: I didn't hurt anymore. The ache that had once lived in my chest, the constant questioning, the quiet begging I never voiced, it was gone. Not healed. Just absent. Like a nerve that had died. Bennett noticed before I did. He began watching me the way people do when they sense loss but don't yet understand it. His eyes lingered when I walked past. He asked how my day was and actually waited for the answer. He reached for my hand in the kitchen, fingers closing around mine like he was trying to anchor something drifting away. "You seem different," he said one night, his voice careful. I smiled. Different how? He didn't answer right away. He never did when truth felt dangerous. "Calmer," he finally said. "Distant." I nodded because denying it would have been a lie. But I didn't explain. How do you tell someone that the part of you that used to wait for them has gone quiet? That was when he began wanting me again. Not gently. Not absent-mindedly. With urgency. He touched my back as he passed me in the hallway. He kissed me longer, deeper, like he was trying to remember something we had lost. At night, he reached for me with a hunger that startled us both. I let him. Because it felt easier than explaining why I felt nothing. He held me like a man afraid of losing ground, his grip tighter, his breath uneven. I lay there beneath his attention, present in body but elsewhere in spirit, watching the ceiling, counting the seconds until it was over. There was no pain in it. Only distance. Afterward he looked relieved, almost hopeful. As if desire had solved something. As if my body's presence meant my heart had returned. I turned away quietly and pulled the sheets up around myself. That was the moment I understood something terrifyingly simple. He wanted me now because he felt me leaving. And I didn't know how to tell him that I had already gone. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just, quietly. I still laughed with him. Still raised our son together. Still showed up. But the version of me that needed his love, that waited for his touch like proof of worth, that woman no longer lived here. And once a woman stops wanting to go home, it's not because she has somewhere better to be. It's because home has stopped feeling like a place where she exists at all. He wanted me the way people want things they are afraid of misplacing. Not gently. Not patiently. Urgently. It happened late at night, after our son had fallen asleep and the house had settled into its familiar hush. Bennett closed the bedroom door behind us with a care that felt rehearsed. He stood there for a moment watching me like I might disappear if he blinked. "You've been pulling away," he said. I didn't answer. I was tired of translating myself into words he could finally hear. He came closer, hands warm, almost trembling as they rested on my waist. There was desire in his touch now, real desire, but it carried fear underneath it, sharp and desperate. He kissed me like he was trying to reclaim ground, like the past months could be undone by urgency. I let him. Not because I wanted him. Because I wanted to see if there was anything left to feel. As he touched me, I watched instead of responded. I noticed details the way you do when you're emotionally elsewhere. The rhythm of his breathing, the way his jaw tightened, the faint crease between his brows that only appeared when he was anxious. My body answered out of memory, not hunger. Inside I was quiet, detached. It was like standing behind glass, watching a version of myself perform a role I had already resigned from. He whispered my name like it was a plea. I stared at the ceiling, tracing a crack I had never noticed before, counting how many times he exhaled. When it was over, he stayed close, forehead pressed to my shoulder, breathing unevenly. "That felt different," he said softly. "Yes," I answered. He lifted his head, searching my face. "Different, good." That was when I knew pretending would finish destroying us. "There's something you need to know," I said. The room changed instantly. He felt it before I spoke another word. "I cheated on you." The sentence landed between us like a dropped glass. Sharp, irreversible. His body went still. Completely still. Then his breath hitched once, twice, like his lungs forgot what they were supposed to do. "With who?" he asked. I told him. He sat back against the headboard, hands covering his face, elbows braced on his knees. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. Not dramatic tears, but the kind that come when a man realizes he has misjudged the cost of his own actions. "I did this," he whispered. Not accusing me. Accusing himself. I said nothing. Regret, when it's real, doesn't need an audience. "I should have loved you better," he said, voice breaking. "I should have seen you. I should have." His voice failed him completely then. He cried the way men cry when pride is no longer useful. Quietly, shoulders shaking, grief collapsing inward. I watched him with something close to compassion. Once this would have shattered me. Once I would have reached for him, comforted him, absorbed the guilt for both of us. Now I just felt distant. "I'm here," I said gently. "But I'm not here the way you want me to be." That hurt him more than the confession. Because that was the moment he understood the truth he could no longer fix. He hadn't lost me to another man. He had lost me to absence. To neglect. To silence. To the space where love should have lived. He reached for my hand, desperate now. "Please," he said. "Don't give up on us." I held his hand, but my heart did not follow. And that was when he realized something no apology could undo. He desired me now because he was afraid. I had desired him once because I loved him. Those are not the same thing. And love, once it leaves quietly, does not return just because someone finally notices it's gone. At first it looked like devotion. He called constantly. Left messages he never used to leave. Apologized in long, careful sentences as if choosing the right words could rewind time. He brought flowers home, cooked dinners he barely knew how to make, touched my face like it was something sacred he might never be allowed to hold again. Then his body gave up. He stopped going to work. The law office called me twice, then stopped calling at all. He couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. His hands shook when he tried to hold a cup. One morning he collapsed in the bathroom, pale and sweating, apologizing between dry heaves like his body was purging regret. At the hospital he looked smaller than I had ever seen him. That was when Silas Calder came. My uncle never rushed. He entered rooms the way storms enter cities. Slow, inevitable, already decided. People moved aside for him without knowing why. He stood at the foot of Bennett's hospital bed, studying him with those sharp, measuring eyes that had taught me how to survive. Beside him stood Edward Hale, Bennett's father. Polished, controlled. A man who had built his life on contracts and quiet power. They exchanged a look. One I had seen before. One that said, "This moment has arrived." Silas turned to me. "Walk with me," he said. We didn't go far. Just down the hallway past humming machines and the smell of antiseptic. He stopped near a window overlooking the city. America spread out in concrete and glass and ambition. "You're old enough now," he said. "And too exposed to keep lying." I felt my chest tighten. Lying about what? He looked at me for a long time. Then, "You are not who you think you are." The words didn't land all at once. They fractured. Silas spoke calmly like he always did when saying something that could destroy a person. "Your mother was not just a woman who disappeared. She was hidden. A concubine to a very powerful man." My ears rang. "He had a wife," Silas continued. "A dangerous one. A woman who erased problems instead of solving them. Thought of my mother. Of absence. Of silence. The doctor told her she would never give birth again," he said. "You were a miracle that came too late. Too risky. Too deadly." My throat burned. "So why did she keep me?" "Because she chose you over safety." I closed my eyes. "She erased you to keep you alive," Silas said. "Changed names. Changed records. Gave you to me." My knees weakened. He caught my arm, grounding me. "Your biological father had 2 sons, Silas went on. "Both dead. Killed in a power struggle that never ended. He had a daughter too, but she's lost. Addiction. Institutions. Ghosted by the family to keep the wife calm." I opened my eyes slowly. "And me?" Silas nodded once. "You're the last heir." The city outside the window blurred. Everything that man built, his lineage, his enemies, his unfinished wars, leads to you now. I thought of Bennett in the hospital bed. Luca. Of the way danger had been circling my life since the truth began to surface. "My life," I whispered, "is a target now," Silas finished. Silence stretched between us. Then he added softer, "That's why I taught you to watch. To wait. To never react first." I laughed once, broken, disbelieving. "You raised me for this." "I raised you to survive it." We stood there, uncle and niece, blood and secrets, while behind us my husband lay in a hospital bed, learning too late how deeply he loved me. I was no longer just a woman betrayed. I was legacy. I was leverage. I was danger wrapped in silence. And for the first time in my life, I understood why peace had never been promised to me. Because I was never meant to live small. I was meant to be protected, or destroyed. Luca noticed Silas before Silas noticed him. That alone told me how dangerous Luca truly was. We were leaving a quiet cafe. Nothing dramatic, nothing exposed, when Luca's body stilled beside me. Not fear. Calculation. His eyes followed a reflection in the glass, not the man himself. Silas Calder. My uncle didn't look like a legend. He never had. No jewelry. No excess. Just presence, heavy, unhurried, final. Men like him didn't announce themselves. They were discovered too late. Luca said nothing then. He finished his drink. Walked me to my car. Kissed my cheek like everything was ordinary. But I felt it, the shift. From that day on, Luca watched more than he touched. He didn't ask about Silas. Didn't push. That was his discipline. Instead, he investigated quietly, thoroughly, the way men do when they know truth can kill. Days passed. Then weeks. What he found frustrated him. Silas Calder had no digital footprint worth trusting. No clean records. No clear affiliations. Just whispers. Old cases that went nowhere. Names that disappeared. And one constant. He had raised me. That alone didn't make sense. Men like Silas didn't raise children unless there was a reason. Luca began watching me differently after that. Not with desire, but with strategy. As if I had become a variable he hadn't calculated for. Then one night, without warning, he asked for my hand. We were alone. No music. No seduction. Just truth delivered like a transaction. "Marry me," he said. I laughed once, not because it was funny but because my instincts screamed. "You know I'm married," I said carefully. "I know," he replied. "And I know you won't stay." That chilled me. "Why?" I asked. He studied me, eyes unreadable. "Because you don't belong where you are. And because the world is shifting around you." My heart began to pound, not from romance but recognition. This wasn't love. This was positioning. I didn't answer him. I delayed. Smiled. Promised nothing. That night, I listened to my instincts instead of burying them. And they led me to the truth. It didn't take long once I stopped lying to myself. Private records. Quiet movements. Money rerouted through shadows. Then, confirmation. Luca Moretti was married. Not openly. Not publicly. A woman hidden far from the city. 2 children tucked away like precious contraband. Protected, isolated, alive because no one knew where they were. My hands shook as I closed the file. So this was his truth. A man who warned me about danger, but didn't tell me everything. A man who asked for my hand while already bound to another life. A man whose discipline extended to secrecy, not honesty. I didn't confront him. I watched. The way Silas taught me. And suddenly everything sharpened. His proposal wasn't romance. It was alliance. Protection offered in exchange for access. And the most terrifying realization of all settled into my bones. Luca didn't just sense that I was more than I appeared. He was preparing for it. That night I stopped denying what my body had been whispering for months. Every time instinct spoke I had ignored it, and paid. Not again. Because in a world where men hide wives, legends raise children that aren't theirs, and love is often mistaken for leverage. A woman who learns to trust her instincts becomes the most dangerous person in the room. The house was too quiet. Not the gentle quiet of a sleeping child. Not the earned quiet of evening. This was the kind that presses against your ears, that makes your body alert before your mind understands why. I called his name once. Then again. No answer. I walked faster down the hallway, my pulse already breaking rhythm. My son's room was empty. The bed untouched. The small blue blanket folded neatly, deliberately, like someone had time. Like someone wanted to be careful. I don't remember screaming, but I remember my throat burning. Then it was gone too. His phone went straight to voicemail. My hands shook so badly I dropped mine twice trying to call back. Panic rose like fire. Hot, consuming, stripping away every lie I'd told myself about control. This was my fault. That thought arrived fully formed, brutal in its certainty. Every secret. Every distance. Every man who had watched me too closely. I had brought danger home and wrapped it in silence. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor, my back against the place where family photos hung, smiling proof of a life I had taken for granted. Guilt crashed over me in waves so strong I thought I might drown in it. I still loved my husband. Not the way I once did. Not blindly. But in the way you love someone who shares your child's blood, your history, your survival. In the way love transforms into responsibility. My son, God, my son. Clarity cut through the panic like glass. This wasn't random. This wasn't a warning. This was leverage. I stood up, wiped my face, and made the call I had been avoiding my entire life. Silas answered on the second ring. They took him, I said. No hysteria. Just truth. They took both of them. There was a pause on the line. Not shock, not confusion. Calculation. Where are you? He asked. At home. Don't move, he said. Don't call anyone else. And don't trust anyone who suddenly wants to help. My chest tightened. Especially then, he interrupted gently. Fear makes people careless. Carelessness gets children killed. I closed my eyes. In that moment something inside me hardened, not cruel but unbreakable. I understood now what Silas had been preparing me for my whole life. This was not about romance or betrayal or identity. This was about survival. I looked around the house one last time. The life I had believed was private, safe, ordinary. I saw it clearly now for what it was. A fragile illusion balanced on secrets too heavy to hold. I trusted no one fully anymore. Not my husband's father. Not the man who claimed to love me in shadows. Not even the blood that connected me to power. Only Silas. And myself. Because when your child is taken, fear either destroys you, or sharpens you into something precise. And I was done being soft. Confusion is worse than fear. Fear burns fast, you scream, you act, you collapse. Confusion lingers. It poisons every thought. It turns love into doubt and instinct into accusation. I sat in the dark living room long after Silas arrived, my mind replaying every face, every word, every moment that suddenly felt staged. My husband gone. My son gone. My blood exposed. My life cracked open. And Luca. The thought of him settled heavy in my chest. He had asked for my hand. He had known too much. He had sensed power around me before I did. What if this was his move? What if he took my family so I would have no choice but to run to him, to accept his protection, his proposal, his world? The idea made me sick. I hated myself for even thinking it, for letting suspicion touch something that had once felt real. But motherhood rewires you. When your child is missing, trust becomes a luxury you can't afford. When Silas returned, I told him everything. About Luca. About the hidden wife and children. About the proposal that felt like strategy wrapped in affection. Silas listened without interrupting, his face unreadable, his mind already working. You did right telling me, he said finally. Truth shared late is still better than truth buried. What if it's him? I asked. What if he did this to force me? Silas didn't answer immediately. Instead he stood, reached for his phone and made a call so quiet I barely heard it. Names were exchanged. Locations murmured. Orders given without emotion. Then he turned back to me. We'll know, he said. Because men who hide families fear losing them more than anything. The investigation was swift. Ruthless. Precise. Within hours they found them. Not the way police find people. Clumsy, loud, slow. Silas's people moved like shadows, extracting truth without alarms. Luca's wife. His children. Safe, terrified, hidden exactly where no one was supposed to know. And then, they took them. When the news reached Luca, it shattered him. I saw it in his face before he spoke a word. The color drained from his skin, his jaw tightening not with anger but with disbelief so raw it looked like grief. No one knows about them, he said hoarsely. No one. That was when something inside me shifted. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't strategy. This was a man realizing the one secret that kept his world intact had been exposed. And weaponized. They're gone, he said again, quieter now. All of them. For the first time since I had known him, Luca Moretti looked afraid. Not for himself. For his family. And in that moment the truth sharpened painfully clear. If he had taken my husband and son, he wouldn't be standing here unraveling. If this were his plan, he wouldn't be bleeding fear through his silence. Which meant something worse. There was someone else watching us both. Someone who knew my bloodline. Someone who understood leverage. And whoever had started this war was willing to burn every family involved to finish it. I stood between two dangerous men, both stripped of what they loved most, both now tied to me by loss instead of desire. Confusion settled deeper, but so did clarity. This wasn't about marriage anymore. This wasn't about betrayal. This was about power. And I was standing at the center of it. The phone rang once. Not twice. Once. Unknown number. My body knew before my mind caught up. My hands went cold, my chest tightening like something had wrapped itself around my lungs. I answered. You're running out of time, a man said. His voice was calm, practiced, stripped of emotion. Surrender yourself. No greeting. No explanation. What do you want? I asked. You, he replied. And silence. I didn't ask about my family. I didn't need to. The leverage was already clear. I ended the call and turned to Silas. He didn't react the way people do when they hear something terrible. He nodded once slowly, like this was a door he had been expecting to open. They want the air, he said. Not the men around you. Fear rose, but it didn't control me. Then I'll go, I said. Silas studied me carefully. Not as a child. As an equal. You'll obey, he said, but on our terms. The plan came together quietly. No bravado. No rush. Silas understood surrender the way generals do, not as defeat but as positioning. I was to go alone. No guards. No weapons. No resistance. But I would not be unprotected. Every move tracked. Every breath counted. Eyes where no one would look. Exit plans layered beneath obedience. I sent one message before I left. To Luca. Wasn't you? No response came. But I felt the truth land somewhere it needed to. The location was abandoned, industrial, rusted, forgotten by the city. America's leftovers. Broken windows. Peeling paint. The kind of place where promises die quietly. I stepped out of the car and waited. They took my phone. My bag. My sense of time. Then they brought proof. Bennett, bruised but alive. My son, sleeping unharmed. Relief nearly brought me to my knees. You did what we asked, the voice said. So we keep our word. Minutes later they were gone. Just like that. No victory speech. No threats. Silas called before I even realized my hands were shaking. They're safe, he said. Both of them. That was when I understood something with terrifying clarity. The Mafia hadn't been involved. Luca hadn't orchestrated this. He had been exposed by it. This wasn't about desire or marriage or leverage through love. This was about blood. About lineage. About erasing a problem before it could inherit power. I stood alone in that empty place, the echo of the call still ringing in my ears, and finally accepted the truth I had been circling my entire life. I wasn't hunted because of who I loved. I was hunted because of who I was. And surrender had only been the beginning. The truth did not arrive loudly. It unfolded the way poison does. Slow, precise, undeniable. Her name was Corinne Vale. I had felt her long before I ever knew her. She lived in the spaces Bennett disappeared into. In the pauses he never explained. In the way his body once turned away from mine with guilt that pretended to be exhaustion. She was the woman he couldn't leave. Not because she owned his heart, but because she believed she did. Silas didn't accuse. Luca didn't threaten. They waited. Because obsession always wants to be seen. The plan was simple and cruel in its elegance. Bennett would meet her one last time. Not as a husband torn between women, but as a man already gone. He agreed without hesitation. Whatever love he once mistook for comfort had rotted into clarity. He had no feeling for her anymore. None. He had chosen me fully, painfully, irrevocably. And Corinne could feel that absence like an open wound. They met in a private lounge. Soft lighting, expensive silence. The kind of place people choose when they believe they are untouchable. Corinne wore white. He always did. Innocence was her favorite costume. What she didn't know was that the room was listening. Cameras hidden in the vents. Audio threaded through the walls. Silas had learned long ago that the truth speaks best when it believes it is alone. Bennett played his part flawlessly. I'm tired, he told her gently. I can't keep living in pieces. Her hands trembled as she reached for him. I did this for us, she said, her voice breaking. Everything, I did it so we could finally be together. He didn't pull away. He let her speak. And she unraveled. She confessed the way desperate people do, through justification. She spoke of love like ownership. Of patience like entitlement. Of me like an obstacle that refused to disappear. I couldn't let you love her, Corinne whispered, tears streaking her face. She had everything. The child. The name. The future. I just needed her gone long enough for you to remember me. Her words turned sharp. I never meant for things to go that far, she said. But once I started I couldn't stop. Power listens when you speak softly enough. He admitted it all. The kidnapping. The manipulation. The call. All of it. I did this for us, she repeated, sobbing now. I suffered for you. I waited. I bled quietly. Bennett stood. That was not in her script. There is no us, he said. The words landed harder than any slap. I loved you once, he continued, his voice steady. But love doesn't destroy families. Obsession does. She looked up at him, shattered. You don't mean that. I do, he said. And I'm done paying for your fantasies. When he walked out she screamed his name. But it was already over. Silas watched the footage without blinking. Luca leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. I sat very still. There was no triumph in it. Only relief. Because the enemy had never been a powerful man in the shadows. It was a woman who loved too much, wanted too deeply, and believed destruction was devotion. Corinne Vale didn't hate me. He wanted my life. And when the evidence surfaced, When her confession played back in cold, unflinching clarity, there was nothing left for her to hide behind. Not love. Not loyalty. Not sacrifice. Just the truth. And the truth finally chose me. They did not come together out of friendship. They came together because failure was no longer an option. Silas Calder moved first the way he always did, quietly, decisively, already 10 steps ahead. Luca Moretti followed, not as a lover, not as a rival, but as a strategist who understood that survival required alignment. And Edward Hale, Bennett's father, stepped into a world he had spent his life pretending did not exist. Power recognizes power when fear strips away denial. Corinne Vale had already done what her handlers demanded. Documents moved. Accounts shifted. Doors opened just enough to keep the machine running, but not enough to end it. She had sabotaged the process deliberately, leaving fractures only one person could legally seal. My husband. Bennett's signature. Illegally. Without it, the deal collapsed. With it, men far more dangerous than Corinne would have access to things that could erase entire families. So they hid him. Not in a house. Not in a hospital. Somewhere quieter. Safer. Somewhere Silas had used before when lives needed to disappear temporarily. Bennett was guarded not by guns alone but by strategy, false trails, digital ghosts, silence. Edward Hale stayed with his son. For the first time he did not command. He listened. I forced him into a marriage like it was a contract, Edward said once, voice hollow. And contracts can be broken. Silas didn't comfort him. But blood can't, he replied. Luca handled the extraction. When they came for me it was swift. Professional. No shouting. No cruelty. Just hands firm enough to control, careful enough not to leave marks. They thought they were moving a frightened woman who would comply because she already had. They underestimated what preparation looks like. Silas had planned for this the moment the call came. Every route mapped. Every signal timed. Luca's men embedded where no one would think to look. Edward pulling legal strings quietly, slowing responses, muddying jurisdiction. When the rescue came it wasn't cinematic. It was efficient. Lights cut. Communications jammed. Doors opened where walls were supposed to be. I was out before panic could turn into violence. Wrapped in a coat, head down, moving through a corridor that smelled like rust and fear. I didn't speak until I was safe. Bennett was waiting. He didn't rush me. Didn't apologize. He just held me like a man who understood that survival comes before words. Our son slept against his chest, warm, real, breathing. That was when I cried. Not from fear. From release. The machine collapsed shortly after. Without Bennett's approval, the illegal chain broke. Names surfaced. Deals dissolved. Corinne's actions became evidence instead of leverage. She had done what they asked, but crookedly. And crooked things snap under pressure. Silas stood back once it was over. Luca did too. This was never about claiming me. It was about closing a war before it consumed everyone standing near it. You're safe now, Luca said, and for the first time, there was no hunger in his voice. Just respect. Edward took my hands. Whatever you choose to do next, he said, this family will stand behind you. I believed him. Because for the first time the men around me weren't pulling in different directions. They were holding the line. And I was no longer the piece everyone moved. I was the reason they did. Freedom did not mean safety. It only meant clarity. Once I was rescued, once my son slept again without fear and my husband breathed without guards counting his pulse, the air shifted. The danger didn't vanish, it changed shape. Now they were coming for a different reason. Not for love. Not for leverage. For blood. My biological father had been surviving quietly for years, balancing on a line so thin it looked like peace to outsiders. He had lost his sons. Lost his name's certainty. And now, without knowing it, he had found me. When he learned the truth, he didn't celebrate. He fortified. Because men like him understand something the world pretends not to. Lineage attracts enemies even when it sleeps. They came at us indirectly. Whisper campaigns. Financial pressure. Old alliances suddenly turning cold. Power structures nudged just enough to destabilize without making noise. They wanted him exposed. Weakened. Finished. And by extension, me. That was when all lines finally converged. Silas Calder moved like a general who had waited his whole life for the right war. Luca brought intelligence and reach that crossed borders without leaving fingerprints. Edward Hale protected the legal flank, dismantling threats with filings and freezes instead of bullets. And then, I met my father. Not in a palace. Not in secrecy. In a plain room with no windows and too much history. He looked at me like a man staring at proof he never thought he'd be allowed to keep. I didn't save you, he said quietly. No, I replied. You survived long enough to meet me. That was enough. We joined forces without ceremony. No declarations. No sentimentality. Just alignment. The enemy expected chaos. They got silence. Accounts were traced. Influence rerouted. Trusted lieutenants flipped without spectacle. Evidence surfaced in places no one could erase. The kind of dismantling that happens quietly, piece by piece, until power realizes it has nowhere left to stand. Curran's exposure was final. Not public. Not dramatic. Her network collapsed as her confession did its work in rooms she would never enter again. She was removed from relevance, which for someone like her was worse than prison. No headlines. No riots. No martyrs. Just quiet justice. When it was over, the city kept breathing. People went to work. Children went to school. America carried on, unaware that a war had ended without ever seeing it begin. What was almost lost was reclaimed. A lineage stabilized. A family secured. A future returned to its rightful hands. I stood between my husband and my father, my son laughing at our feet, and understood something profound. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it survives. Sometimes it protects. Sometimes it ends wars so quietly that history never learns the names of the women who made it possible. And that was fine with me, because I had never wanted the throne. Only the right to keep what was mine, without disappearing to do it. Some endings don't need witnesses. They need honesty. I didn't tell Silas. I didn't tell Bennett. I didn't even tell my father. I did it quietly, because quiet had saved me more times than noise ever could. Luca's family was being kept safe, not harmed, but safety that feels like a cage is still a prison. His wife had never asked to be hidden. His children had never agreed to live like secrets. And I knew, better than anyone, what it does to a child to grow up erased for someone else's survival. I went alone. No guards. No ceremony. When I saw her, Luca's wife didn't scream or plead. She simply stood between me and her children, eyes steady, spine straight. A woman who had learned endurance the hard way. I'm not here to hurt you, I said. She studied my face, searching for deception. She didn't find it, only fatigue and something like remorse. I was part of what happened, I continued. Even if I didn't begin it. Silence stretched between us. Then I said the words that mattered most. I'm sorry. Not for Luca. Not for power. For fear. For letting suspicion justify collateral damage. I ordered their release myself. Routes cleared. Names wiped. No debts. No promises owed. Freedom, clean. When Luca realized what I had done, he didn't try to stop me. He didn't thank me either. He just nodded once, like a man who understood that some chapters end not with love or betrayal but with respect. This is where we stop, I told him. He accepted it without argument. No hatred. No longing. Just closure. Later, on a quiet afternoon, I saw my mother. My real mother. She stood at a distance, dressed simply, her posture careful. Still living as a woman who understood her place in a world that had never forgiven her for surviving it. She had kept her life intact by staying invisible, because my father's wife would never accept her. Not publicly. Not privately. Not even with a glance. And my father, he loved me. But he loved survival more. I did not resent him for it. He had already lost too much by choosing emotion once. My mother and I did not embrace. We didn't need to. Our eyes met, and in that quiet recognition lived years of sacrifice, fear, and impossible love. She smiled first. Not proudly. Relieved. And I understood then what her greatest sin had been. Not loving a powerful man. But choosing a child over safety, and never asking to be forgiven for it. I walked away lighter. Because I had learned this at last. Some people must remain where they are to keep the world stable. Some truths must be loved from a distance. And some chapters must be closed not with revenge, but with release. I set them free. And in doing so, I finally freed myself. I had been running for most of my life. From truth. From danger. From myself. But now finally I stood still, and the world adjusted around me. Bennett changed quietly at first. Survival sharpened him. Loyalty hardened him. Truth stripped away the comforts of illusion, and for the first time he faced life as it truly was. Not as a lawyer drafting arguments or an office man behind polished doors, but as a husband, a father, a man who understood that love carries weight, not convenience. He learned fast. He protected our son not because it was required, but because he finally understood responsibility. He moved like someone who had touched the edge of loss and refused to let it touch us again. I watched him quietly from the kitchen doorway one morning, his hands steady while he prepared breakfast, the way he folded our child's little clothes with patience I had never expected. He wasn't perfect. He was real. And that mattered more than perfection ever could. My biological family embraced him. Not immediately, not blindly, but with recognition. They saw the man I had chosen, the father of the last heir, and they understood what he represented. Stability, respect, and the kind of quiet strength that earns trust, not demands it. Even my mother stepped forward publicly for the first time. Not to claim her child or rewrite history, but to stand beside me as a woman who had sacrificed silently for decades. Her presence didn't erase the past, but it acknowledged it. And that acknowledgement was enough. As for me, I kept my identity hidden, carefully, strategically, not out of fear but out of the wisdom I had learned in the shadows. Names, lineage, history, they were tools, not trophies. Power is most enduring when unseen. I walked through the city, through the corridors of influence, through the quiet streets of the ghetto I had once called home, knowing exactly who I was and exactly what I could protect without shouting it. I was no longer the girl Silas raised to survive. I was not the wife who had waited for a husband who only discovered love too late. I was not the daughter hidden from a dangerous world. I was my own legacy, and I carried it with grace, vigilance, and an unshakable sense of self. Bennett took my hand one evening as we watched our son play in the yard. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His eyes said it all: love, respect, and the quiet reverence of a man who had finally learned what it meant to stand beside someone fully without reservation. I squeezed his hand back. We had survived what could have destroyed us. We had endured what could have broken our family. And we had emerged, not perfect, not naive, but real, whole, and stronger than any force that had tried to tear us apart. The woman I had become was not born from privilege, nor from comfort, nor from unquestioned love. She was forged in fire, polished in pain, and tempered in truth. I was finally free. And this time nothing would take that from me.